Good morning, everyone. This is LadyDragon speaking. We'll continue with a keynote. I only have 2 left, so we're going to go with this one. It's Monday, January 27th. It's 10:03 a.m. This one, there's a bunch of speakers. I couldn't fit them all, but they're going to talk about energy transition. I'm not sure what that means, but we'll learn. Here we go.
Well, thank you very much for being here. To our audience in the room, a special thank you. And to our audience online, a thank you as well. My name is John Penny, and we have a fantastic session with some leading thinkers in the world of energy and the energy transition. And what I'm going to do right now is let them introduce themselves and then come back and do a little context setting, and we're going to jump right in, and I'm sure you're going to find this really interesting, useful, and hopefully give you opportunities to work within your companies to think in a very positive way about what we'll be discussing today on a critical issue. So, Paul, can you introduce yourself, please?
Sure. Paul Denninger. I'm an operating partner at Material Impact. Material Impact is an $800 million tough tech venture capital fund. We have 32 portfolio companies focused on sustainability in a variety of markets around tough tech.
I'm Barbara Hampton, CEO of Siemens USA, and Siemens is an industrial tech company.
Hi, my name is Tak Ishikawa. I'm President and CEO of Mitsubishi Heavy Industries America. We're also a tech-oriented company, but we're really into hard tech. And like Barbara's company, we were also the foundation of our each respective country's industrial revolutions 150 years ago.
It's a fantastic group because we're talking about one of the biggest challenges that humanity faces today, which is the energy transition. And just to give you some context on why what we're talking about is so important, why it's also so challenging, and why it's also an extremely large opportunity. I live in Santa Monica, and right now, literally, Los Angeles is on fire. So 2,000 homes have been lost, or if you live in Florida and you've seen the floods, or you've been in Greece, what's happening in our world is that for the last 100 years, we've been basically taking dinosaurs and plants from under the ground, called fossil energy, and putting them through energy generation, through the creation of energy that powers and grows our global economy, into the atmosphere as what is known as greenhouse gas, or CO2. We put so much of this pollutant into the air. It's roughly about 40 billion tons of it a year. And to give you an animal scale sense of what that is, that's roughly 8 billion elephants, or it would be somewhere in the range of 9 billion cars, which is more than there is on the planet. We do that every year. And so what's happening is our Earth is a closed system. It has an atmosphere around it that's 5 miles high, and you could drive that in 5 minutes at highway speeds, or you could walk it in, an hour and 15 or 20 minutes. And the problem is that the energy that is being trapped in our atmosphere is having all of these negative impacts on the total, geophysics of our planet, and issues for all the plants and animals and denizens of the sea. So what we're here to talk about today is very much related to the future and the opportunity to make sure that we reverse that trend of growing amounts of carbon in the atmosphere and look to a future where our energy systems are much lower carbon than they are today across all industries, because that's the way we will reduce the heating that is going on. And just one way to think about that is that now 75% of all greenhouse gases are from energy production. And the world is using roughly only 20% clean energy and 80% fossil. And so the consequential piece that we're talking about today is the transition from fossil to clean energy, and doing that as quickly as possible, because we're behind the curve based on where we and science from 192 countries, their scientists come together in what's called the IPCC and basically tell us that we need to reduce the amount of carbon we're putting in the atmosphere, and then you're going to hear some really exciting technologies about thinking about putting carbon back underground from whence it came. So that's the general context. The issue that we're going to jump right into is this is a massive change, the biggest change in industrial economics and in societies since the Industrial Revolution. And that means there's a lot of things that have to work right and get together to make this happen. One of those is looking at companies and figuring out which companies can have some significant opportunity that are smaller and how to think about those to work with larger companies, and then larger companies having an incredible ability to scale technologies, which is what we need to do. I'd like to turn to Paul first to talk a little bit about what's different when we think about entrepreneurship and innovation in climate tech versus what many of the audience or folks online might think of as classic Silicon Valley. You know, I own Meta, I own, I own Google, whatever it is. Can you give us some thoughts on that?
Well, thank you, John. I would say that it's partly, you got to take it in a historical context. There was a time in the 80s and early 90s, and I'm old enough to have been there, to know that IT was tough tech. And so we've been here before. But the problem is that the Silicon Valley venture model today has forgotten, or frankly, most of them were not around. And so they don't understand the difficulty of how hard it is to build hard companies. We had a saying back in the day, which is software companies fail soft, hardware companies fail hard. And so we have to be able to build something where we can get through that really, really difficult period. And today, that really, really difficult period requires more capital than it did 60 years ago or 50 years ago or 40 years ago. And so there's a need for more capital. And the second piece is the IT investor was building companies for an IT buyer. An IT buyer is generally off the line of the customer, and they're innovative, and they take risks, and they can do things in pilots and such, and small companies can have an impact. These companies are on the line for the customers that they serve. Those customers are very conservative. They're not going to take their line down for a new tough tech technology. And so there's an enormous difference in the amount of scale that's required to have an impact. And unless you do it at scale, you're not going to have an impact. And another problem is incumbencies, the incumbents in any industry. The traditional today Silicon Valley model kind of eschews incumbents. In fact, it might even disdain them. But in tough tech, I think we have to embrace them, because the incumbents have the trust of the customer. They understand how difficult this is. They can help us get to market in a more capital efficient way. And so in many ways, we have to invert the Silicon Valley model on its head and recognize it's hard, not easy. It's a lot of capital, not a little, and incumbents matter a lot. They can't be ignored.
I think it's absolutely fantastic. I'm going to turn to Barbara, and I want to give a point that may just generally help you. In Silicon Valley today, and all the large VCs, they grew up in a model, the VCs today, grew up in a model called asset light, where you try and build software businesses at scale with network effects very quickly. And Paul's just given us the reason why that is not a way forward in climate, because climate, the investment is in hardware and in software. And if I just told you, and I bet I'm pretty close to being right, that for the largest, most valuable VC firms in Northern California, 9 to 9.5 out of their investments in their portfolios fail, and 1 wins. So if 90 to 95% are failing, that's not going to solve the climate problem that we need to solve within the next 5 years. So it brings me to Barbara, whose company has completely reinvented itself around sustainability, lowering carbon, and has a unique position in not only working with the hard hardware, but working with new startups. Can you tell us about what you're doing at Siemens in that regard?
Happy to, and what a pleasure to be with you all. The Siemens Corporation is 175 or more years old. 1847 was the founding. And this is a company that, like Tak said, has been in the midst of every industrial revolution. The appreciation for hard tech, the appreciation for having to deliver something and maintain it over decades. This is part of the DNA of an engineering core that has made Siemens so successful. What's fascinating right now is that we live in a moment of incredible disruption. And if you haven't noticed, it's times of disruption that give us the best opportunity to shape the future. Our job right now is to figure out what we want the world to look like, and then make sure that all the investments that we're making are aligned with the future that we want. Now, in 2010, Siemens said, we need to be reorchestrating our strategy, and you know what? Let's analyze the global megatrends that will shape the world of 2050. Climate change, urbanization, the aging demographics of people everywhere, the ever more global supply chain, although now we talk about it in terms of global because we really are going regional, and the digitalization of everything. And Siemens said, let's take our know-how in electrification, automation, digitalization, let's bring it to bear on this change that's happening. And lo and behold, here we have the perfect opportunity. If you study history, you can easily see, I see Carmichael Roberts here in the audience, and I learned at the Breakthrough Energy Summit last year that what history shows us is that energy is prosperity. We're in a moment when the introduction of AI, what's been happening through the work of CTA and what you've seen at CES each year, is driving a whole field of technology that is demanding ever more access to electricity. How are we going to solve that? This is a disruption that presents an incredible opportunity. So at Siemens, what we've focused on is digitalization and sustainability. When you combine the real and the virtual world, now you have an opportunity to think and control before you act in the real world. Make digital twins, model out what's happening. You can make better investment decisions by understanding what are the factors that are going to influence the system I'm operating in. These are the building blocks Siemens is bringing to the table. And just like we saw revolutions in our personal lives, our entertainment life, our retail life, we're now seeing that tech coming to industry. The technical revolution coming into industry, the industrial revolution coming into the tech sector. What we're looking at right now is an infinite industrial revolution because we're now able to use software-defined automation in order to manage these systems of energy that are being introduced.
I love that, and as I go to talk in 1 second, I think the notion that the disruption yields opportunity, of course, the disruption and the problem is existential, but the opportunity is so large. To give you a stat, last year the International Energy Agency in Vienna estimated that the world spent $2 trillion on clean energy. General estimates are in the next 3 to 5 years it'll go to $5 trillion. The global economy is $102 trillion, so there's a lot of play that we have. The amazing thing about that is that just to put it in perspective, the market cap of the 5 largest companies in the world that are all tech companies is 15 trillion. So we'll be spending every 3 years to change the energy systems of the world, as Barb was saying, which are very aligned with economic growth. That makes this transition the biggest business opportunity in the history of humanity. The biggest business opportunity in the history of humanity, and we have to do it. So this brings up a really interesting idea that I think Talk can take us and give us a really useful perspective on. Much of what we have in technology around climate change is ready to go. Green energy is the cheapest form, solar, onshore wind, but there's a lot of things that need to be invented in order to sustain many, many different types of industries and many different communities around the world. And Talk, I know your company is not only an engineering company, but also just a company that has an ability to look to the future like Siemens as well and say, we're going to solve a grand challenge. Can you tell us how hydrogen fits into this general context? Because as we talked before, I know you and the group thinks it has a very, very strong place.
Well, thank you very much. And again, Barbara, you're a hard act to follow. Our firm was founded I'm sure you've all seen the TV show Shogun. Our firm was founded right after the Shogun period ended in Japan.
Okay, samurai wins.
Yes.
I'll gladly be the youngest in the group.
But see, we had nothing. So we were the industrial revolution of Japan and imported technology from Germany, UK, and America to industrialize our nation. So our industrial technology in Japan did not start with the textile industry like in the US or in UK. It started with coal-firing internal combustion engines to steam, to use the steam to industrialize our ships, our locomotives, and everything else. Fast forward, after 150 years, we decided 5 years ago that we really need to pivot from being an internal combustion fossil fuel burning company to a company that can address CO2 emissions, because we emit a lot, our technology emits a lot, to provide the technology to remove CO2, capture CO2, or use CO2 for better use. So right now, we have the world's largest technology already in place to capture to capture CO2 from an exhaust pipe. It captures 1.5 million tons of CO2 a year. We also have a hydrogen-enabled gas turbine technology already in place. And the biggest project in the world will be starting up this year in Utah. We also have technology regarding geothermal as well too. We also have technology in nuclear. And for the first time, and this also relates to CES, for the first time, the big tech companies that are all in this conference, we all talk about AI. It requires just unfathomable amount of power, which there is not enough. And because the big tech companies, I'm sure some of them may be here today, they all have made lofty promises of being clean by 2035 or 2040. Some even saying we're going to be negative CO2, right? I think they are struggling on how to do that. At the same time, meeting the demand and winning the race on AI supremacy. We think we have a solution. We have the gas turbine technology, we have the carbon capture technology, we have the hydrogen technology. So a combination of those will provide cleaner power.
I love that, and one thing that the audience should know is in carbon capture, we talked about the CO2 in the atmosphere. We have to take it out of the atmosphere and put it back underground, and that's so that the Earth doesn't keep heating. And these types of carbon, at least capture and sequestration technologies that are incredibly engineering challenged, physics, material science, only large companies can do this, but this is exactly what we need. I think, Tak, you also bring up a great point, which I want to go to Barbara too, which is this notion in AI, and the recent estimate I was talking about before is that right now data centers use around 3 to 4%, create 3 to 4% of global CO2 output. But with AI, estimates from significant players in energy say it could go to 8 to 13% of CO2 output. That's one industry nearly tripling in the next 3 to 5 years. That is, I can tell you, sort of close to catastrophic in terms of where we need to be going.
For sure.
Now, Barbara's company has designed its philosophy around AI and improving outcomes, for example, in supply chain. Like, can you tell us more about how you see AI as opposed to just the data center problem that I mentioned?
Yeah, well, first of all, let me just say that these estimates that we have today are evolving, right?
Yeah.
I've heard everything from 3x to 5x to 10x the amount of demand for electricity in the next decade. And in fact, we're reaching a moment where we're seeing the electrification of everything, so that data centers won't be the only thing demanding more power. So let's get ready for that. What I see from a lot of you here at CTA is attention to the energy efficiency side of the equation. And so, I mean, didn't we see Jensen the other night at his keynote talk about the incredible energy savings with the next generation chips that he's bringing out? We know we're going to see Moore's law applying even to the technology that's being created. So we can't just linearly extrapolate out from what we're dealing with today. Okay, great. We've got to work both sides of the equation. We got to be more energy efficient, and then yes, we know that we are going to have to grow. And so at Siemens, the question we have as we see the new technologies that are emerging year after year is, how do we apply these technologies into the domains that we've grown up with? In the energy sector, in manufacturing, you know, in the buildings, the built world around us. And one simple example is, we know that we need to do carbon accounting in supply chains for manufacturers. Well, what Siemens has done is introduced a blockchain-based tool which enables participants in a supply chain to share data in a proprietary way, protect their information, but be able to expose the critical carbon details within a supply chain so that can be aggregated as the manufacturing process goes on. Now, one more thing I want to say, though, about blockchain. Think about this, the ultimate distributed computing application. What we're finding is that blockchain can sit on the grid as a variable demand load. I mean, think about all of the people who need access to constant, clean power. And they say, hey, you know, I'm going to start up my data center. I need, you know, this many megawatts. I need this many gigawatts these days. Or a pharmaceutical manufacturer. I have to have, you know, perfectly high quality energy at all times. Well, that's not how power looks when it's coming across on the grid. It varies, particularly with renewable energy. Yes. Well, blockchain is the perfect application to sit on the demand side and use energy that's being produced that's in excess of what's required by those steady power consumers. I want us to think about these technologies you all are inventing and say, what impact can they have on the way we implement in the energy space?
I think that's a fantastic point. I'm going to go to Paul and take it just in a little different direction in 1 second.
Uh-oh, because I have a direction I want to go.
Okay, well, we'll go in your direction because you're the master of your show. So just about what Barbara said, which is really, really critical there, is in supply chains and in everything outside of the factory, like, you know, Procter & Gamble or Mitsubishi, about 80% to 90% of all emissions are not within the company, it's in the supply chain and in the downstream. So the type of technology you just mentioned is absolutely critical, because if we can't measure it, we can't change it. And all companies now globally that are of any scale have to disclose. So I thought it was a great point. You could take it where you'd like, and then I'll probably have a follow-up question.
Great. So I want to pick up on two of your themes, Barbara. Great. First was, we talking about AI and data centers. And you mentioned blockchain. The average person would not think, oh, blockchain, what a great way of helping with energy management.
Yeah, isn't blockchain an energy hog?
Exactly, exactly. So here's another one. Instead of focusing solely on the power generation, or the power consumption used by processors, what about whatever else is in the data center? For example, about 30 to 35% of all power in a data center is consumed by the storage technologies that are in it. 70% of all storage in a data center is hard drives. Those hard drives never stop spinning. And when they never stop spinning, that means they never stop consuming energy. Oh, by the way, when they spin, they create heat. And when they create heat, they need more HVAC. So what if you could figure out a way to disintermediate that? So one of our portfolio companies, Folio Photonics, has come up with a radical new optical technology that can scale with data centers. And the replacement of HDD with this technology will result in a 90% reduction in energy consumption per terabyte, petabyte, however you want to measure it. So this is a massive change that is not necessarily what people would think about at the outset.
Agreed.
And people will tell you, oh no, there's a green premium, right? It costs more to do the thing that...
There is no such thing as a green premium. If you have a technology out there and you're trying to put it out into the marketplace and expecting it to get a green premium, you're going to be out of business sooner than you can imagine. The number one principle of investing in climate tech is you've got to get to price parity. And you have to be at performance parity. Price parity, performance parity, or you're dead. So the second thing I wanted to mention was the grid. You know, the grid was designed for monolithic, massive nuclear, coal, gas-fired plants, shipping electrons in one direction on a line out to a distributed network at a time when nobody cared about efficiency. That's not the world we live in today. We live in a world with distributed energy production. There could be EVs at every data point that are going to be pushing electrons back onto the grid from storage. And you've got a massively bidirectional network. And the system wasn't designed so that. So when you talk about the challenges and solutions to the energy transition, if we're going electrification of everything, we got to change the grid. We've got to dramatically improve the grid, and I know you're working on that.
Yeah.
And I just want to say, and we have one portfolio company that's really interesting called Ampersand, and that company, which is a Singaporean startup, has built the first small but scalable solid-state transformer. And it's going to dramatically change our ability to manage the grids. And these are the kinds of core technologies that need and are required, but we can't do it without partnerships. We need to have partnerships in order to be able to make an impact at epic scale.
A material impact. Barbara, you want to follow up on that, and then I have a
I just want to tell this audience and anybody who's watching this, if you want to get engaged in a really exciting sector, go to the grid edge. Where the grid meets the building, where the grid meets the vehicle, where the grid meets the factory. This is where this bidirectional flow, this ability to generate power from your excess heat in a data center, et cetera, electrons flowing every which way, it's going to be a really exciting place to do development.
Tack, you're on deck. I just want to explain one thing about the grid. Power generation in the United States and around the world doesn't have any balancing in the middle. So when you need more power wherever you are, you have to increase the output of your generation. So your generation typically was coal, oil, and gas. And you couldn't store power in the middle. You need more for air conditioning, you need more for your city in the winter, you had to do that. The problem that we face with 20% of global energy being renewables, and we need a lot more of it, is it needs to be balanced to when we have clean energy. We have the most clean energy between 10 and 2 and 10 in the morning and 2 in the afternoon because the sun shines then. And just all of you are fans of California or not. 100 days of the year, last year, California ran on 100% clean energy, but it's not load balanced. So that's what you're hearing about these technologies are the ways to make the grid far more efficient in how it delivers when and where so that we can put more green electrons on it and not have to spool up gas plants.
Well said.
So with that, I would like to go to Tuck. Tuck, you have a bunch of partnerships which are with large petrochemical companies. And those companies have an issue in the future of the reduction potentially of petroleum usage and stranded assets. What are they thinking about, and what are they like, as you've all said, partnering is a key advantage. How are they to partner with in what you're trying to drive them towards a next generation thinking around clean energy?
I just hope people from Exxon or Chevron are not listening. But everyone is different. We have a joint venture with Chevron. We brought Chevron into a project out in Delta, Utah. And it is the biggest hydrogen storage facility in the world. And also the biggest hydrogen project that'll be tied to a gas turbine, which will use 30% hydrogen when it's completed later this year. The reason I say it's the biggest storage is that we have drilled, solution mined, 2 huge reservoirs in the salt domes of Utah. Each one of them is the size of the Empire State Building. And it stores 11,000 tons of hydrogen underground. So we produce the green hydrogen using curtailed wind. There's a line that has both ways. It's a DC line that goes both ways. So we can bring in curtailed renewable power into our electrolyzers and produce and store hydrogen. And when there are shortages or when the prices are too high, we use the hydrogen to burn, to produce power for people of LA County.
You balance the load.
Yes.
Great.
We balance the load. Now, the reason why we felt it was really important to have people like Chevron be part of the partnership is when you think about what an electrolyzer is, it's a big chemical process.
Can you just tell people what an electrolyzer is?
You use renewable power and you use water and you take out H2O. That's what water is, right?
Yeah,
so
there
you
you
take out the H and O using power and you separate it. So the H2 becomes the hydrogen that's being stored, but it's a big chemical process. The process has been around for 100 and odd years, but to do it at mass scale has never been done before like this. So we needed people like an oil major who are very good at operations and safety in a project like this. So working with them has been a joy, but they have certain rules that we have not even fathomed. And that's how they operate their facilities. On the other hand, we have another joint venture or a partnership with Exxon. Exxon has acquired the Denbury pipeline, which is the world's largest dedicated CO2 pipeline. And their aim is to collect lots and lots of CO2, use the pipeline, and to sequester the captured CO2 into the ground.
Underground, right.
Underground. The project in Utah, also underground. Our firm knows everything above, I think, above surface, even space, and underwater, but not underground. Underground, that's really the business of the oil majors.
Yeah.
And you need to be able to sequester CO2 underground for at least 100 years, in some cases 1,000 years.
Correct.
Do it safely and effectively. That's really the forte of the majors.
So these are incredibly complicated problems. And that's why you need giant scale. And we need to take the CO2 out of the atmosphere and put it underground, or else it keeps heating things up. And it's an interesting thought because, you know, a lot of, I've just used the oil world was transformed by drilling technologies, but also visualization and simulation to find new oil and gas fields. And it brought up a thought in my head, which was I was walking around the floor, and I saw a really interesting example of what's called a digital twin. And it was a digital twin of human organs. So it's a digital kidney, heart, and it's fully chemically exactly like those body organs, and allows scientists to work on them and do simulations like. And I saw a really interesting example of what's called a digital twin. And it was a digital twin of human organs. So it's a digital kidney, heart, and it's fully chemically exactly like those body organs, and allows scientists to work on them and do simulations for drugs and all sorts of things in much faster time than if they had to do them in vitro or in a body. Now then I go to the Siemens booth, highly recommended, and I see a whole area around digital twinning. And I would love Barbara to take us through the idea of digital twin and why it's so important in the reinvention of how we think about grand scale technology and energy transition.
Thank you. How much time do we have? No, I'm teasing.
Not enough.
Not enough.
No, but in simple terms, think about the way we've always done engineering, right? We have a concept, we make drawings. And for centuries, that's the way we accomplished our work. We developed plans and went to work. Once we were able to make these plans digital, then it gave us another level of connection and control. We could pass things along in a digital thread. Well, one of the things that Siemens has developed is the most comprehensive physics-based digital twin. The ability for you to model something and actually apply the laws of physics to confirm its strength, its aerodynamics, its electromagnetic performance, et cetera. And so what we've learned is that if we can use this kind of digital modeling in the real world today, we can save cycles, model, check permutations, try things, test things, and then choose what we want to move forward with. And it shortens the cycle time. And let me give you just one quick example from a battery manufacturer. I met an innovator who's actually investing in the United States. We had the chance to have a discussion, and I asked him whether he had chosen to use digital twins as he plans his manufacturing operations. And he said, oh, I'm doing better than that. I'm actually building a scale version of my, call it one line, a small scale version for real. So we're gonna have an actual plant. Well, let me tell you, I saw him 6 months later, and he said, Barb, you were right. I built that line, but I forgot to put in overflow areas. And if you know, making batteries, it's a chemical process. There's a slurry that comes through. And believe me, when one part of the line shuts down, you've got a mess on your hands. All right, so I'm
Literally.
Literally. So I'm saying to everybody, the power of using digital twins today, it gives us the ability to envision what we want, actually put it together and test it. Everything from the Mars rover to the Jet Zero plane you'll see in the Siemens booth, to physical organs, to agriculture. All of these things are benefiting from digital twins. And I'll tell you that the Department of Energy in the US at the National Renewable Energy Labs actually is using digital twins of the grid to help people make great decisions about where they're putting, maybe you've been part of some of these studies, where are we gonna put our assets on a very complicated grid? Digital twins are what are going to fuel our future success.
I think it's fantastic too, because
I did that in 3 minutes.
it was unbelievably clear, and thank you for just opening up so many thoughts about that. I'll just give one tiny thought, which was fantastic. What we've talked about is we need to accelerate the rate of innovation in very hard technologies that cross hardware and software. We don't have the financing systems that are aligned to do that, and we have to invent a lot of the engineering within the field to actually deliver the opportunity to reduce carbon in the atmosphere and put it under. So what Barbara you just described is an absolutely spectacular simulation environment that hopefully gets us there faster, because building the model was yesteryear's approach and often took 3 to 5 and 6 years to get to scale, and we don't have that time. So I'm really happy you brought that up.
John, one of the big issues, and I think this is going to apply to finance as well, is how do you apportion risk and reward?
Right.
Yeah.
And the only way to understand the system risk and reward, I believe, is through modeling. And I love the work we're doing with NVIDIA, because NVIDIA is committed to this with the Omniverse. I think when we get to the point where we can actually start to rebalance those risk equations, we're going to find we can actually justify the investments that we're making because of the offset risks of the future.
So this is absolutely perfect segue, because I was going to go to Paul. So Paul, in as straightforward terms as we can get it for maybe people who aren't as used to the finance world, what are your ideas on what could be new models? Because none of this, as we've said, falls into the traditional Northern California innovation model. So just in a minute or two, is there some things you've been thinking about in that regard?
Sure. So first of all, I think it's important to recognize the venture capital community. Venture capital was invented in the 1940s, by General Dorio from Harvard Business School. ADR was the name of his firm. Then a bunch of family offices got into it, the Whitneys, the Rockefellers with Venrock, and an industry proliferated over the past 75 years. A new model is needed. We need to reinvent venture capital in some way, shape, or form. One thing that is required in this environment is, as I said, more capital. More capital in order to scale, to build the plant. When we have one of our companies that is going to build some sort of a plant that's going to cost, pick a number, $100 million. Once we've proven that first $100 million plant, I have capital out the door ready to give me money for the second, third, fourth, and fifth. The problem is the first one.
Yes.
Because there's venture risk in a plant like that. Breakthrough Energy Catalyst is an example of this new kind of fund, where they've raised about $1 billion. They've invested in 5 to 10 companies so far to do these first-of-a-kind, novel manufacturing. So we need a way to provide, but you can't do it with pure equity. It's too expensive. And you can't use a traditional debt provider because they're too risk averse and they don't understand the technology. So somehow we have to find a way to bring an equity mentality to a debt environment. And if I was a young man today, I would do that. I would raise that fund today. I'm too old, but that's what I would do.
So that's a great point, because we're almost at our time, and I just have to say that point is much about innovation in the world of finance. It also includes the insurance industry, for a whole other topic we could get into. But these are the things that need to be done to support the giant scale of what we're trying to do here. Large companies with incredible capabilities and power to scale, working with realistically large entrepreneurial companies. And let me try and wrap it all up for you for what you've heard in the last 15 seconds. What we basically said is the planet is heating up, there's too much CO2 in the atmosphere. Our current energy system produces that because of fossil energy. We need to flip it from 80% fossil and 20% green and go as far to green as possible. There are issues all along from power generation to the grid to the end user. They're all interrelated in a system. The problem with the system is it requires systems thinking, and our economies, companies, and universities are siloed entities and now need to work together along with policymakers to deliver ultimately a very large scale solution, city scale, national scale, global scale. The important thing to remember is you are all part of this. And as advocates for what you've heard today, which was factual, it was about opportunity, it was about challenge, you can now go forth in your companies, either be a participant and an advocate, or just message the importance of this energy transition and its complexity, learn more about it, and become hopefully evangelists for a different type of future, not just for us, but for 3 and 4 generations out there, and if you like animals, for all the animals on the planet. We've had an amazing group tell us about the cutting edge of the energy transition. I'd love for you to give them a giant round of applause. I've learned a lot, and they've been great.
Thank you. Well done.
Fantastic.
Thank you.
Wow, that was very, very interesting, I must say. Very, very interesting. I told you, we need to listen to these things because we are, I want to talk to these companies. Say why, that's why I'm listening to these keynote. I want to know which company I want to work with, which I want to call. I need to know what they said. I'm going to call them. I need to watch their thing. Very, very interesting. Very interesting what Mitsubishi is doing. So now we have one more left. And I'll come back in 5 minutes. C'est vraiment intéressant. Vraiment, vraiment intéressant. Pour ça qu'on peut écouter ça, parce qu'il faut savoir les compagnies qui ont fait des innovations, puis ils font les innovations. Ça. Les compagnies que je veux parler, que je veux travailler avec, c'est les compagnies qui ont des innovations. Des vraies innovations. Pas des so-called innovations, mais c'est juste la même affaire avec des différents chiffres. Donc, il nous reste une keynote à faire. Je reviens dans 5 minutes. I'll be back in 5 for our last keynote of CES.